Hello, everyone. At today's topic, I will be discussing inclusive learning environments for ELs or ELLs. My name is Yuriana Valdez-Herrera, and I have been a third grade bilingual educator for 3 years. I am currently working towards my MLS and will be working in a campus next year, where there are about 90% ELs enrolled. So I will be transitioning over from an educator, a bilingual educator in the classroom, to the library. I have attended multiple professional development trainings specifically to teach ELLs. A lot of them have been very intensified. They teach strategies that are really integrated for specifically for ELs. Some are more generic, and also trainings that have to do with the dual language program that was set forth for our district. So, my expertise, like I've said, I've been an educator for 3 years. For the past 7 years, however, I have been working in a campus in Duncanville ISD, where I have served as a registrar, attendance clerk for 4 of those years. And then I had transitioned over to being an educator for the remaining 3. So a little bit about when I was a registrar and attendance clerk. It really did make me see a little bit more of the EL side, just not in the sense of enrollment, but as of initial placements. I have worked very closely with the LPAC representative at the campus, and so I got an insight as to what all entails as far as initially identifying and placing students in the right program. So the reason why I mentioned this is because it does have a lot to do with that inclusive environment that is created for ELs. So when students were registered initially and they were identified, um, LPAC has stepped in and made sure that they were placing the students based on their language needs into the right classroom so that they would get the support needed in order to succeed, that being with any of the teaching styles that would support them and the environment or the classroom that goes along with it. So I did get to learn a lot about the initial placement for EL students when I was there as a registrar. And that helped me understand a little bit more once that process goes into effect, what does the teaching and the environment is based on for EL students once I was able to go into a classroom. So I have liked that path that I had taken to where I started initially knowing about their placements and then went into playing a big part of their placement. The district followed the Gomez and Gomez dual language program, which included a series of strategies to apply on day-to-day basis for students to follow. It was until last year, though, however, that Duncanville has stepped away from the Gomez and Gomez program and decided to create their very own dual language program. Still taking some of the components from the program that they used to use and implementing them to their new one. So what are these components and how do they play an important part in creating that inclusive environment? So these were some of the things that were emphasized as a supportive environment for students. And I'll go into detail into each one of them and how they worked in the classroom, as me being the key role of facilitating these things in my very own classroom. So bilingual partners on the picture that you see here, that is an example of what a bilingual partners chart looked like. So what it was, the teacher will, based on language strengths of the students, the teacher will place each student that is dominant in English with a dominant Spanish speaker. The English speaker usually was dominant in both languages, so there were pretty much a strong student to help support in either language, either English or Spanish. The Spanish speaking students were predominantly more dominant in Spanish. Their focus language or their most comfortable language was Spanish. So they were able to succeed more or do more in the Spanish language. And those students in the blue were considered pretty much like hybrid students. They can do very, very well in either language, English or Spanish. Labels around the classroom was something very important from the program that we followed, whether it was the Gomez and Gomez or the dual language program per our district. It just it helps students to properly call things for what they were. If they were predominantly English speakers, it gave them that exposure to the Spanish version of things around the classroom, things around the school, but the labels really were emphasized in the classroom. Word walls for English was something that was very emphasized, so much emphasized in the classroom because there's just so many rules to the English spelling continuum. And so we needed to ensure that word walls for English words were present. Now, this past year, before this past year, we all had, DL classrooms had, Spanish word walls, but studies had shown, and this is per my professional development sessions, that Spanish word walls were actually not effective and really did not play any, significant role into students' academic success. Pretty much they were saying they were pointless. So what was done instead of having Spanish word walls, they became grammar word walls because in Spanish there's more of an emphasis in the spelling convention of when there is emphasis on a letter in a word or the accents, the way that words are used based on a sentence structure. So that became more relevant to what the students needed as far as emphasizing that focus rather than just spelling, because Spanish is very transparent. There was no need for Spanish word walls. Anchor charts with visuals was something that was very important to make sure that every time I did anchor charts, it included more visuals and words, only because EL students did very did a lot better when they knew they had a visual to follow, and remembering certain terms and the meanings that went with it. Sentence stems were also very important, and it was very important to enrich the classroom with those in the English and Spanish versions because it allowed for students to properly phrase their sentences accordingly to the different articles and the way that sentences are structured. Before this year, I didn't put too much emphasis on sentence stems, but when I did, I started realizing that students, and they're not wrong for doing it, it's just an instinct. Students were translating what they were saying in English directly into Spanish, and so they were not constructing proper sentences in from English to Spanish or Spanish to English because they were directly translating. So, for example, whenever we say the red ball, the red would be the adjective, ball would be the noun. When we translate that over to Spanish, we wouldn't keep that order. We would actually flip the adjective and the noun so that the noun goes first and then the adjective. So that's what students were doing. They were directly translating. They weren't appropriately translating their sentences. So those sentence stems really help students to make sure that they structured their sentence in either language. Reflection journals were something that we also did. They were a support to writing and reading just because it ensured that students were reflecting on their learning either in either language, either English or Spanish. And so one thing that I really loved this past year was before with the Gomez and Gomez dual language program, content areas that were taught in Spanish, the reflection journals were written in Spanish and vice versa for English. This year, however, though, that flipped and that allowed students to give reflection opportunities in either language. So, for example, if math was taught in English, the students were able to reflect in Spanish. with, of course, the input of the teacher. So that was something that the teacher decided to do, but I thought it was very important to allow for that opportunity because a lot of students, because of language barriers, they're unable to succeed or communicate what they have learned because they are not fluent in the dominant language that we want them to be, and that's English. So I like that we actually make that change so that students can very much so communicate in their preferred language. Language of the day was something that we also did, which was I really liked, and I made it into um, a reward system as well, just to kind of motivate students to stay within that language. So what we did is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, students would speak only in Spanish, unless they were in the content area of English, which would be math and English reading. But for any other content area and for like if we were out in the restroom or anything, including the teacher, I'd make sure that I'd emphasize that too because I was the model. We'd make sure that we speak in that language. And so the same thing happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays when we spoke in English. And this was very nice to make sure that it was emphasized only because it did get the students to use both languages rather than just letting them speak in whatever language they wanted. I do believe in that freedom of them choosing what they're most comfortable with, but I wanted to ensure to let them know that, true bilinguals will make sure that they put into use their both languages as they're acquiring the one that they're learning. So I made sure that this was something that I stressed within my classroom. And then one thing that was fairly new to us last year, I know that a couple other districts were doing it, but for Duncanville, we started bridging of the languages. So a lot of people would say that that's translating over from English to Spanish, but it's actually connecting both languages together. So when there came an end of the units, then if we studied a unit, let's say science, we were talking about the life cycle. Well, in a DL classroom, science was done in Spanish. So of course our content would be done in Spanish. By the end of that unit, then we would take a little bit of time to just go over the content of the life cycles and then talk about them and bridge the English portion. So everything that we had learned in Spanish, we would make sure we bridge it in English. And that gave students an opportunity to make sure that they made those connections between both languages. So that's what a supportive environment was when it came to the classroom. And here's a couple of pictures. I did have a couple students, and this is just an example of them working with their bilingual partners. So I think bilingual partners was one of my favorite aspects in providing that supportive environment, just because you did have somebody supporting you rather than the students feeling like they were being left on their own. So I think that they trusted themselves in each other a lot more than when they actually came to the teacher and they felt like maybe they were asking too many questions, but they just felt really supported with somebody else there working on the same problem. So this is, like I said, an example of working in bilingual groups or bilingual partners. Here's an example of an English word wall, what an English wall would look like in a dual language classroom. And then this is a bridging. This is what I mean by the bridging activity. So then we know that math is taught in English. So at the end of a unit, then we would bridge the opposite language. So here we see an example that the English and the Spanish is being bridged and with the connection of visuals. So visuals are very, very important for EL students. Something I'd like to mention was I came upon a very interesting article of an impactful story, or should I say stories, because it involved 12 students by De Sosa. She mentions how the impact and academic success of 12 English learners played a major role in their success at acquiring English, considering that they have immigrated to the US between the ages of 4 and 14. So in the article, it actually talked about how the impact of the library gained their success. So a lot of the times we think that the library doesn't add any value to what the classroom can do. And I feel like I'm here to say that that's completely wrong. Me going from a DL classroom into the library as a bilingual speaker, I feel like there's a lot of those things that I have learned and have done in my own classroom that I can implement in the library. Um, that I know that can allow for that concurrent success for EL students. So I know there's some things that are doable. So therefore, thinking about the supportive environment factors that I had mentioned earlier. And this is just my thinking of within the library that we can continue to build that supportive environment. So I can definitely see myself doing bilingual partners in the library for any major big projects or collaboration lessons that I would do with teachers that can help students support one another. Definitely the labels around the classroom, and in this case, it would be the library. I would make sure that labels are going around the library so that they can make sure that their vocabulary enrichment in both languages are continuous, even when they step out of the classroom. I also do believe that word walls for English in the library are very important, only because, yes, we do involve heavily reading, but when there are opportunities for students to write, I think that it's important for them to know that they have that support there too, so that they can always direct to the spelling. Not so much grammar words for the grammar word walls for Spanish, but I can definitely see myself doing that every now and then if need to be. Anchor charts with visuals, I can see myself doing that within the classroom as well. And then sentence stems for sure, English and Spanish, because we want to ensure that students are they are able to begin sentences and complete sentences, speaking complete and sentences in English and Spanish accordingly. And then the use of language of the day. I could also see myself emphasizing those things as well. Bridging of the languages would be something that I think I can almost see myself doing, especially taking on a read as well. So I know that my mentor librarian, when she would do read alouds, before she did them, she'd go over some of the words that would be present within the read aloud books beforehand with the visual in English and Spanish. So I guess in a way, when I think of that strategy, I almost see it as bridging before the book. um, I can see it also being done afterwards or connecting read alouds or readings in order to bridge in both languages. So there are definitely a lot of the things that I have done in the classroom and seen and continue to learn about DL students and supporting them as to building a supportive environment for them, not just within the classroom, but really anywhere. And like I said, my goal would be really much so as to doing it in the library with the year to come as I transition over. Here are my references, and I do want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this topic. I do feel that our ELs do have to be very much supported in order for them to feel like they can succeed in life. Some of them come in not knowing so much, and so it really is up to us to provide that support. Thank you so much.